Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second special lecture of the second day of the Peace Festival. This presentation will be under the title Kim Dae-jung Thoughts on His Legacy from a German Perspective. Once again, as the moderator, we have Dr. Baek Hak-sun, and as the speaker, we have His Excellency Georg Schmidt from the German Embassy in Seoul, in Korea.
I am back again, and this is the last session of this festival, and we are truly honored to have the German ambassador to Korea. And Germany, as you know, is a very special country in the sense that the Germans and German leaders consistently supported President Kim Dae-jung when he fight for democracy and human rights in 1970s and 80s and all the way. And President Richard von Weizsäcker and also the Willy Brandt, Chancellor Willy Brandt, and others were constantly helping President Kim Dae-jung in his very serious and difficult fight in Korea. And German leaders did whatever they could do to save Kim Dae-jung's life in 1980. And also you might recall that it was in Berlin, specifically more in detail, it was at Free University of Berlin, when President Kim Dae-jung proposed a new policy to North Korea, so-called Berlin Declaration. So if you think of Germany, if we think of Germany, Germany is one of the closest countries in our minds who we are thankful for their support to President Kim Dae-jung. Thank you again, and please join me in welcoming His Excellency Georg Schmidt, German Ambassador to the Republic of Korea. Maybe you can speak sitting here, or you can take the podium if you like, as you please. Okay, and maybe you can speak about 30, 40 minutes as you like, and after that we will have question and answer period. Thank you, sir.
Yes, dear Professor Pike, ladies and gentlemen, 안녕하십니까? 독일 대사 게오르 슈미트입니다. 만나서 반갑습니다. Yeah, I think it's nicer to stand up because when you sit, you feel your voice gets more slow, and you heard so many speeches today already, so I admire you that you spend your time. It's a beautiful sunny day, and instead of taking a walk on the beach, you come here to get together and to listen to speeches and talks and thoughts about Kim Dae-jung. So I appreciate that, and I felt very honored to be invited by the organizers here. Because when I thought, what should I say, what can I contribute? There's so many eminent scholars here in the room who know Kim Dae-jung much better than I will ever know him. There's so many people who living in Korea, who being Koreans have a personal connection which is very direct. So I asked myself, what can I tell you? Is there anything new that I can contribute to this? So I thought what I can do is I can speak from a very personal position and from my personal experience. So this will be a German perspective, but forgive me, it's also related to me as a person. And why do I say that? Because I was born 1963, so you can all calculate my age now. But when I was a fairly young student, I was curious to see the world, and I ended up in Asia. I ended up in Hong Kong, Japan, China, Taiwan, Also in Korea, the first time 1987 as a traveler. As a traveler, you don't care about politics. You just want to have a good time and enjoy yourself. But I was a student at that time in China, and I could see the hope for democracy in Korea actually being fulfilled in 1987. And I remember watching the Olympic Games on television in Seoul in 1988, and the commentators kept saying, like, this is a new Korea. This is a Korea that has not only achieved economic prosperity, but that has also achieved a rule of law, that has achieved freedom, that has achieved a degree of democracy, which in the region was quite a strong signal. And I remember many of discussions. I was in Hong Kong that time, which was a colony, but many discussions about that. And so there was a contrast. There's the hope and the positive feeling in Korea. And then 1989, you saw the same or a similar hope for democracy actually being smashed in China, in Tiananmen Square. Not only Beijing, but also in many other places. That was quite a shock to many of my Chinese friends also, who wouldn't have expected that their own army would start shooting their own people. Well, they hadn't heard of Gwangju. And I remember as a student, we had many discussions. When you go there, people ask you about Germany, about your own experiences. You keep comparing the country where you are to the country where you come from. And there are lots of discussions about Asia versus the West. And so often the West was confronted with stereotypes. Europeans were seen as like selfish, individualistic, materialistic. And then many of my interlocutors, they would say, but we Asians, we are family-oriented, we are community-oriented, we're more spiritual. And this whole thing came then back as the so-called Asian values debate in the 1990s. And there's one particular moment, and here I'm coming now to Kim Dae-jung, when I read his article in Foreign Affairs in 1994. So this is published exactly 30 years ago, and in November 1994. And I read it once, and I don't know how many times I have been rereading it since then. And I think still I reread it also before coming here when I thought what to say. Because why is this article so relevant, or why was it so relevant to me? Because it pierced through the whole idea of culture as destiny. And it was a rebuttal to others saying that, oh, we are Asians, our cultural values are not compatible with Western values of Western-style democracy and human rights. And so it reminded me of so many of my discussions that I had as a student. And if I look at the article, Kim Dae-jung, he quoted many sources of Asia for human rights. For instance, Mengzi on the value of dignity and others, and the rule of law. So he basically in this article said there's nothing incompatible with our value system with human rights and democracy. So I quote him now, instead of making Western culture the scapegoat for the disruptions of rapid economic change, it is more appropriate to look at how the traditional strengths of Asian society can provide for a better democracy. So in other words, he said, look into your own cultural roots, start searching with an open eye, and you will find many references to human dignity, to the rule of law, to fairness, maybe not to the system of democracy, but to the underpinning values that brought us where we have. I'm quite sure that totalitarians everywhere must have hated Kim Dae-jung for this article, because they often hide behind, oh, it's not in our culture. It's good for you, but it's not good for us. We can't do that. And his article had a strong influence on me personally, but I also know many people in Germany read it, and I'm very sure that many people also in other Asian countries read it and say, look, if the Koreans can have it, why can't we do it? And I would actually dare to go even beyond Asia and Europe, you can look in many, many cultures and histories, and you find that there is this aspiration for fairness, to do good, to keep to rules for all, of equality. You have to look hard, but you can find it in many, many others. Whether it's practiced or not, it's a different question. But you find the ideals, because to me, they're very human. Human beings have this hunger for justice in themselves. And here comes also the next important argument to me about Kim Dae-jung. Culture is not destiny. It's not static. It's not like a law of gravity or something that you can't do it. Culture is basically, it's us. It's not a kind of superhuman force. Take, for one instance, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. This was a text written right in the aftermath of the Holocaust against the Jews, initiated from my country, from Germany. So 3 years later, people sit together and they want to draft a document about universal human rights. And there was actually a strong influence of Asian thinkers on the drafting process. It's not so well known. There was an eminent Chinese scholar, Chang Pengchong, at that time from the Republic of China. There was a famous Lebanese intellectual, René Malik, and there was a lady from India, Hansa Mehta, who was also part of the drafting committee. By the way, she changed the introduction from all men are born free and equal to all human beings are born free and equal. Very important change. And if you look at this phrase, all human beings are born free and equal, that's not a phrase that kings and queens in Europe or anywhere else would have liked to hear. So it was very radical, but it was nothing that if you say, I'm born as a king, then the whole idea is that you're not equal. So you can see how radically new this is for any kind of culture to have these ideas. Slavery was common in many, many parts of the world. So when dealing with Kim Dae-jung's thinking, it led me also to dig much deeper into European history. And actually, if you take a closer look, there is not only a strong resistance against democracy and human rights in Asia that hides behind cultural values there very often, but there's a lot of Europeans or Westerners, I don't like the term Westerner because I think it's hard to say what is the West, but there are many, many people also who oppose liberal society, who don't like pluralism, who don't like individualism. If I look at my own country, if you look at, for instance, German Romanticism, it was longing for an imagined, beautiful, bucolic past that never existed that way. And they didn't like modern life at all. We have important writers in Germany who idealize heroes, and they look down on traitors. They like a cult of death. They say you have to die for your ideals. You cannot just live and trade and deal with the differences. And very often totalitarian leaders use that for their own ideology. And the Nazis in Germany are one of the most prominent, and look what they've done first to Germany and also to all our European neighbors. So I would get very careful when I see a cult of a leader wherever I see it. Let me come back to the Asian values debate. This happened 30 years ago. But if you look at it, the topics for the discussions are still very much with us. Because you find this cult of a leader in many places. Here you just need to go some kilometers north and you find it in North Korea. You can find that the Communist Party in China also claims that democratic values are incompatible with Chinese culture. And maybe that's one of the reasons why they are so angry about Taiwan, because Taiwan is an example that you can have a traditional Chinese society which lives with democracy and human rights, and which does quite well with it. If you look at Russia, the Russian leadership now, they also want to set up their own orthodox religious ideology against what they call a decadent West. And I think using some part of Kim Dae-jung's cultural clarity and analytical spectacle helps me at least, and would help others also, to pierce through this culture is destiny line of argument. And so it's not so much just Asian values against Western values. It's very much like, are you in favor of a liberal world order, or are you finding yourself more comfortable with an illiberal world order? We have an a system, one of the EU's member countries, where the Prime Minister says we are an illiberal democracy. Interesting word, choice of words, an illiberal democracy. So, and between those extremes, there are lots of shades. And the debate of that is very complex, but just reducing it to cultural differences, I would say, doesn't really help for clarity. And if I look at the ongoing election in the United States of America, you see a clash of different visions in what people call the biggest country of the West. So it's not the West against the rest, it's deep divisions within our own countries that we have to deal with. So again, reading Kim Dae-jung 30 years ago helped me to be much more helped me to have more clarity on this thought, and it opening the doors between cultural destiny. So it's interesting, here's a young German who reads Kim Dae-jung in China as a student, and by this goes all the way and starts relearning or trying to relearn about also European history. And it could have been another intellectual, but for me personally, it was Kim Dae-jung. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not only his words, of course, that we are sitting here, because many people have said similar things and very erudite analyses of their surrounding. But I think it's also his deeds. When I reread his acceptance for the Nobel Peace Prize, he himself said that he was been near death 5 times, 6 years in prison, 40 years in house arrest. And this is some courage which impressed so many everywhere. And so when I think of him also going into exile, I think, are we doing as free societies enough for people today who run for exile, who need the protection? Would we welcome them with open arms as much as other countries have welcomed Kim Dae-jung? Do we do enough for their protection? Not everyone will be able to come to fame, but I think we should sometimes think about maybe one of them will be, and if they get the help from the country that we are based in, it's a good thing. I think his courage is also very interesting and very important when it comes to reconciliation. And no German cannot be touched by Kim Dae-jung choosing Berlin as the place where he actually declares his Berlin Declaration. I mean, Berlin, the German capital, which has been through so many ups and downs in its history. And here comes Kim Dae-jung and he chooses this place. Here comes a politician who has very close connections with Willy Brandt from the Social Democratic Party, as well as Richard von Weizsäcker, a conservative. So that must say something about his personality, that he cut across the political spectrum also in Germany. And it's a testimony to a character who very much tried to live up to his ideals and reach out to different sides. I'm try to live up because as a human being, everybody has also shortcomings. But I think his appeals for balance while having a very strong inner compass, that's something that resonates to me as a German. This year we are celebrating 75 years of our Grundgesetz, of our constitution. And this constitution starts with the first article. It talks about human dignity as a core principle. Remember I talked about Mengzi and human dignity? So they were looking, I don't think they were reading Mengzi, but you have some similarity here. And it's the first sentence in our constitution, that it shall be inviolable. And protection of individual from the state. But at the same time, this constitution always breathes the spirit of balancing. You cannot have absolute freedom. You have to have balance with all collectives. Like your freedom ends where the other person's freedom begins. There are different rights, and it's a very carefully constructed edifice, I would say, which is not absolute here or there, but which always weighs like the advantages, the pros and cons. And it's designed in a way that it's flexible enough to deal with changes. Otherwise, it wouldn't have survived. And it talks a lot about our social market economy. So it takes into account that individuals want to strive, move forward, excel, be better. But we need society as a whole also to take care of the others. So a welfare state is something very important. And from my reading of Kim Dae-jung, he was attracted by the idea of a welfare state, that you have to somehow create mechanisms also to balance between the rich and the poor and to bring along the ones who are not that strong. And I think for me, compromise culture is not a bad word. To me, it's something very positive. But it rests on generally accepted rules. Or in other words, it's fine to disagree as long as we agree how to disagree. Internationally, I think compromise is also very important between countries and different systems. So when I read Kim Dae-jung's texts, what strikes me is like peaceful coexistence. And again, from a German perspective, we lived in a divided country, in a divided continent that was locked in a deadly confrontation with a threat of mutual destruction. That was the first important step to say, we don't agree with you, but let's have peaceful coexistence. Let's not kill each other because we would both end up not better off. But what's the line then to give in to blackmail or not? Willy Brandt, one of Kim Dae-jung's role models for overcoming our national division, he knew very much the balance between strength and to talk from a position of strength and clear principles on the one hand and compromises on the other hand. If you follow German history, as always, it's based on we will not be bullied, we will not do this and this, but yes, we're willing to take compromises in different shades. And so there's firmness and flexibility. And in my humble opinion, this is also what Helmut Kohl then later followed in his policy. And it's very tricky because we feel in European history, we've seen where appeasement leads to, and appeasement leads to much greater demands for dictators. So in today's world, I'm quite sure that German chancellors from Willy Brandt, Helmut Schmidt, or Helmut Kohl, I had the privilege to work for Helmut Kohl when I was a young diplomat, it was very impressive. I think they would have not doubted that we need to support Ukraine in its struggle, because that support can create a peace which is a just peace and not just a surrender. Let me finally speak of one other important quality that impressed me with Kim Dae-jung, and that's hope. Learning about his life, I think it strikes me how he maintained his hope for a different career, facing so many personal challenges. I talked about it, arrest, imprisonment, almost killed. And to me, this is incredible. How can he maintain this hope? How can he stay like this? How can he not give up? This is quite an inspiration. And I think we as diplomats, we need hope in our lives. Look around you at the situation. The war in Ukraine now even involves North Korean soldiers, which I feel is first and foremost a humanitarian disaster. It's a tragedy for those people who are sent there who might not even know why and what they're dying for. It's also a political issue, but first it's a humanitarian issue. We see the war in Israel, Lebanon, Gaza, Iran, Sudan, Myanmar, to name but a few. But with all that, I think as a diplomat, we should never, ever give up hope. And there is some hope also. Probably not many of you have read the report about a pact for the future, which was passed this year at the United Nations General Assembly. It's 30 pages, 56 actions in different fields, include diplomatic action, the rule of law, human rights, international finance, the reform of the Security Council, and 147 countries managed to vote in favor. 6 were against, amongst them Russia and North Korea. And the document, you can say, oh, it's far-fetched, but it's guided by at least the hope that we need the United Nations, that we need international law, that we need rules that are applying for smaller countries and big countries, and we need cooperation to address challenges. Climate change doesn't care whether you're in North Korea or South Korea. Climate change doesn't care, or the pandemic doesn't care whether you're in China or the US. The virus is very egalitarian, very communist, so to speak. So we need cooperation on that. And I'm proud that Germany and Namibia, a former colony of Germany, but now a strong friend, that we managed to bring this resolution, this text together, and managed to create, amongst all the difficulties, a sense of hope, at least. And maybe if Kim Dae-jung would have been alive, I think he would have been a natural partner for an initiative like this. Now you can say there are many inspirations of hope, whether it's Kim Dae-jung, whether it's politicians like Nelson Mandela. I also saw on the program that you had someone talking about Desmond Tutu here, who himself once called himself a slave to hope. We heard about the East Timor experience, which is very inspiring for so many around the world, also not giving up hope despite a long and hard struggle that was so difficult for so many. And the hope, and we just exchanged our words, and I think it's a very impressive example that also that East Timor walked a path of clearly stating where they want to be in independence, but also a path of reconciliation with their neighbor, which I think is very inspiring for so many. And also for hope, if I look at a German philosopher who doesn't celebrate his 100th birthday, but 300th birthday, that's Immanuel Kant. If you read the works of Immanuel Kant, he reminds us that you need to be hopeful in order to change anything to the culture. So the idea of hope, I would say, cuts also across cultures. Otherwise, I, as a German diplomat, would not stand here and confess that Kim Dae-jung, for me personally, is one source of hope and admiration. I think Korea can be very proud of him. I think you all can be very proud of him. Thank you very much. 감사합니다.
Thank you, Ambassador Schmidt. His, recollections and perspective on the legacy of President Kim Dae-jung, and particularly, I was very much impressed. In addition to others, which we'll touch upon soon, that thing was regarding courage. Courage, you emphasized the importance of courage. And as long as I understand Kim Dae-jung, when he used the concept and importance of courage, the courage intrinsically contained fortitude and justice. By fortitude, we mean a courage and a tenacious, long period of duration with repeated, new beginning. You do not give it up. You begin again and again after going through all kinds of ordeals. That's courage. That's a fortitude. The other was justice. He believed in the justice of history as well, as we all know. So I thought I might forget about this, so I made some comments on it first. Before I open the floor, let me say some questions and comments as well. It was very interesting for you recall you're reading about Foreign Affairs article which Kim Dae-jung which appeared in the November issue of 1994, which was a rebuttal to the previous issue article, March and April issue of that journal, in which the famous journalist Farid Zakaria, and I had a conversation with Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore, who basically argued that culture is destiny. In other words, for Asians, democracy is not suitable. It's not their culture. So Kim Dae-jung basically rebutted that argument, debunking so-called the myth of anti-democratic values among Asians. So you mentioned that, and and most recently I had a conversation with a professor teaching at Seoul National University, and he was so impressed by that article, and so he made it a rule to have his students read that article again and again. So it was so nice to hear you mention about Kim Dae-jung's the famous foreign affairs article, "Culture is not destiny." And so if you think about culture between East and West, and European and Asians, and also the current difficulties because of the problem of war and peace, not only in Ukraine and Middle East and other areas of the world. What kind of feeling or attitude assessment do you have when you try to understand the problems of conflict or war, which basically involves the conflict of cultures?
Well, speaking from a European perspective, and forgive me for being very direct, it's to me quite an achievement that Russia can manage to sell its war in Ukraine as an anti-imperialist, anti-colonial struggle. Because this, to me, is a typical imperialist struggle. It's one country attacking the neighbor, and not just attacking and withdrawing, but attacking, occupying the territory, taking away the language, saying you all have to speak Russian now, and still many countries in faraway places, like in Africa, Latin America, they feel, oh, Putin is standing up for a more just world order. And to me, this has a cultural dimension. You ask about culture, because there is a whole cultural underpinning, if you watch Russian media, that they say, yes, we are orthodox, we are traditional, we hold up the values, we're not decadent. For us, a man is a man, a woman is a woman, we have the traditional family values. So he paints like a picture as if it's a cultural war. To me, it's very much a power struggle. But the fact that he is so successful in many shows that so many people feel that they're very unhappy with what happened after, I would call it, the end of history. So we are all paying the price because people say like, but what happened in Iraq? What happened in Libya? What happened in Syria? Now, as a German diplomat, I can tell people Germany was not okay with Iraq, with the Iraq war in 2003. As a German diplomat, I can tell you we were not happy with the intervention in 2011. We were in the Security Council, we abstained. The Americans were very, very unhappy with us. That's why, for instance, I also don't like the word the West. What is the West? What are Western values? If you ask a little bit deeper, also cultural values, you come to extreme changes. I take one example, the death penalty. As Europeans, we feel strongly about the death penalty, that it shouldn't be there. The United States of America has the death penalty. Japan has the death penalty. So is it the West? Is it not the West? And if you go one step deeper, we only abolished the death penalty in 1949, much earlier than many other European countries. East Germany only abolished it in the 1980s. So I think the culture, and that's coming back to your question, sorry, it's a long way. It's not like there is a fixed culture here and a fixed culture there. It's the way we do things, it's the way we perceive things, but it's a very fluid concept that can be also utilized to justify a lot of things. If I look at the Christian religion, which teaches that you should not use violence and you can have wars in the name of God. Even in Buddhist countries, you had Buddhist wars. So it can be tweaked and turned and twisted. And I think Kim Dae-jung, that's why I wanted to take this part up. I think he, with his article, he pierced through that argument, saying like, oh, an Asian cannot be democratic per se. It's like as if culture is some kind of DNA, you cannot change it. I'll give you another example. We were taught in Germany that the French are our hereditary enemies. Now you mix up again biology, hereditary, it's like in your DNA, you can't change the color of your eyes. Well, in Korea you can, but it's mixing up biology with culture. And the French were told the Germans are your hereditary enemies. We were told the French are our hereditary enemies. And it's nonsense. It's got to do with politics, economics, and whether you find a way to resolve conflicts without killing each other. And we did that in the European Union. That's why it's such a shock to us that war is coming on our doorstep. That's a shock to us that somebody changes borders. If you go back 200 years, or not even 200 years, Hitler would have felt very comfortable because this is what Hitler did. He changed borders with force. It was tried and tested. It was only after 1945 we said, no, we should not change borders by force. So this might be the revenge of history.
Thank you. This is not about culture, but personal religious belief is also important. And I would say that President Kim Dae-jung was a Catholic, he's a Christian, but he's a person, he's a leader who went beyond Christianity, encompassing other values and religions and cultures. That's something that popped up just before when I listened to your answers. Another thing that comes to my mind when I have a conversation with you and listening to your presentation has to do with President Kim Dae-jung's plan or thought to apply Willy Brandt's Ostpolitik and also the so-called Helsinki Accords, which was adopted by CSCE, Conference on Cooperation, CSCE, Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe. That accord basically consisting of three baskets, as we know, security, economy, and human rights. President Kim Dae-jung is known to have tried to apply those two experiences and knowledge Europeans have been through to the Korean situation to promote reconciliation between the two Koreas and promote peace on the Korean Peninsula. And now you are the ambassador of Germany to Korea, and we have seen through other developments since 1995, early 1970s. And so what do you think about the kind of lessons you are getting from your own experience, Ostpolitik, and Helsinki Accords?
I'm often asked about the lessons of German reunification for Korea. And I think no country has studied German reunification more thoroughly than Korea. There are tomes and tomes and volumes. But I think maybe also North Korea studied it very carefully. And maybe that's why they're so reluctant about sunshine politics or Ostpolitik, because in Chinese you call it peaceful evolution, 和平演变. So the Chinese say, look, you come friendly, but you come with a whole agenda of subverting our system, So maybe that is something. The big difference is that between East and West Germany, of course, we never had a civil war. So it was much, much easier. We never treated the East Germans, or we never considered them as our enemies, because we were spared the bitter experience of a civil war. That made things much easier. What then is the lesson, and that's why I picked up peaceful coexistence, is that we realized that there is no way to change the status quo by force. If you live in this power confrontation where any war could easily and quickly escalate into something that's collective suicide. And that took a long time. We had people who said, no, let's go and use force, and we can drive the Soviets back, and we can liberate East Germany. And there are people in East Germany who said, let's liberate the West Germans from their fascist overlords and from the American claw. So there were militants on both sides. And I think you mentioned the OSCE. It was a brilliant mechanism, because in Basket 1, the East was so happy that we finally recognized the Iron Curtain. So basically, to translate it in undiplomatic language, what's yours is yours. We will not touch you. Which was very painful for the people in Prague, 1968. It was very painful for the people in East Germany, 1953, and others. And then the second basket is like, let's do trade with each other. And the third basket that was grudgingly signed by the Soviet bloc is, yes, we do human rights. And if you see what that triggered with Charter 77, with people who said, but you signed this, Comrade Brezhnev, you signed all this. How come you cannot let this happen? Now in Germany, again, there are waves of reinterpretation of Ostpolitik. Many people said it was the Ostpolitik that was responsible for the collapse of the Soviet Union. The conservatives say, no, it's not the Ostpolitik, it's Ronald Reagan who put a very clear stop sign to the Russians, who used Ostpolitik but still put more and more missiles and weapons to it. And at the end of the day, the Soviet Union overstretched and collapsed. I think the interpretations will change from time, but I think both have their importance. That's what I tried to say as a diplomat, I think, with flexibility. I can negotiate with another person, but I can't negotiate with a gun pointed to my head. I can negotiate and listen and say, these are legitimate concerns, I listen to you, I deal with it, but if there's a gun only pointed at my head, I can't negotiate, I can only surrender. Now in the Cold War, we had a strange situation, if we stay in that picture, that we both pointed guns in our heads. Not a very clever way, but somehow it worked. But I think we had a lot of luck also that these guns didn't go off. So yes, we see Ostpolitik, and I think it's always important to talk. And if I see now that there's not even a channel for dialogue between North and South, I think this is very dangerous, because even in the worst times, we could always talk to the East Germans, and even if it's just to avoid a misunderstanding. So we always had a channel to talk to each other. We have an embassy open in Moscow, and so we engage in them. Talking to someone doesn't mean I agree with you, but if I don't talk with the other person, there's no way, how can I communicate? If I see the North shooting missiles, maybe that's their way of communicating. But there are better ways as human beings to talk to each other. And if you look at German history, we made lots of compromises which are difficult. We spent, for instance, a lot of money to buy out political prisoners from prison in East Germany. Now, people were criticized for it. You're strengthening the government there by paying money, but you could free some people and give them some hope. This is, again, it's not physics. You can't say what is right, what is wrong. It's a political, it's a moral decision which leaves you always in complicated questions. And the one who is responsible for doing that is, you can never get out of it, I think, just as only shining light. But to be tolerant and to admire it, like to see where's the balance, I think that is very, very impressive. And then when I see that here in Korea, I wish and I hope, I know the situation is very difficult, but I would hope for also some kind of reason that prevails that says, like, look, let's calm down the temperature. let's see how we can live with each other peacefully as a first step.
Thank you. President Kim Dae-jung once said emphatically, to forgive the forgivable is good, but to forgive the unforgivable are true forgiveness. And you said dialogue between all kinds of players involved, importance of dialogue. President Kim Dae-jung might have said to do dialogue with the people who can be communicable is a good thing, but a real dialogue is to communicate with people who are not ready to dialogue or to communicate with. Thank you for that. And now it's time to open the floor. And please, okay, Minister Kim Myung-ja, please. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Your insightful and heartfelt representation. And that said, if I may, I'd like to raise a difficult question for you. That is, how do you expect the international situation to change if Trump is elected in the US election? For instance, the US-EU relation, the US-China relation, and the Korean Peninsula situation, and the Paris Convention on Climate Change, and so forth. Hard question, difficult question.
So Minister Kim was the Minister of Environment Protection during President Kim Dae-jung's presidency.
Actually, the question is, the topics are difficult and very, very serious, but the answers are not that difficult to give, because we saw what Trump did with the Paris Convention in his first presidency. So there's good reason to believe that he will dismantle the American participation again, which is a huge setback, which allows others to hide behind the US and say, like, oh, if the US is not serious about climate action, why should we be serious about it? And I think the only hope we can have is that countries see themselves that it's so damaging for themselves, that it's in their own interest to do something about it. But yes, I see, and it's interesting that's not so talked so much about so often, but I see this is the biggest threat, medium perspective. You talked about his relationship with the friends of the United States. And again, like in his first presidency, in his first term, I don't think he really valued that the real strength of the US is not just the US itself, but it's to have very strong friendships. And the way he treated some of his friends left open a lot of question marks. So we will have to deal with it. It's a decision by the American people. We will have to see what's going to happen, but it teaches us very strongly that there are certain things maybe that we took for granted from the United States for a long, long time. And we in Germany, we owe the United States a lot. The United States were the country that really supported us in the Cold War. The United States was the country that also managed to turn around an enemy relationship to a friendly relationship. It's a miracle. Like 1945, American planes were dropping bombs on Germany, and a few years later, when Berlin was blockaded, they were dropping food. Can you imagine that? Like only 2-3 years later, they were dropping and helping. And for the old generation, this was like a miracle. Like, these are not our enemies, they're actually helping us. So, and the United States supported us in our reunification. President Bush was very clear about it. After Gorbachev opened the door, President Bush was the one who said, yes, please do it peacefully. So this is not forgotten in Germany. And it will be very difficult if we have a leadership which doesn't care for these relationships that much. We always had our issues with trade, with protectionism and this, but we dealt with it in a way on the basis like we're friends. But you can argue and squabble with friends, but at the end of the day, you're friends. I don't know what's going to happen. I really don't know. And I think it affects Korea even more because at least we have the European Union around us. You only have the US as guarantor of your military security, and you have Japan. So that's difficult. So yes, we're in, and I'm sure that people in Ukraine watched this election with much, much more of a headache. I mean, they have been fighting off a much stronger country with a lot of bravery and a lot of courage. And I think you can see the difference between, for instance, an Afghan army that disappeared and the Ukrainians who didn't disappear. They're not fighting for the Americans, they're fighting for themselves. And how they will take it, will we be able to fill the role of the US? No, but what's going to happen? So I think last time I looked at the news, it was pointing in a certain direction, let's see, but we might say, future historians might say that 2024 was a watershed moment. And what the US does affects so many countries in so many places in the world. So the question is very, very obvious. And the answers are not encouraging, I would say.
Any other questions? Yes, please. Yeah. Actually, the organizer, Minister Kim Sung-jae.
2차 대전 이전에 나치
Before World War II, there was socialist Germany. Now we have a democratic Germany. These two Germany seems to be very different, even though the people are the same state. What drove the big change of German destiny? I was always wondering about that. Before the World War II, there was Germany. Now the current Germany, which care for the human rights and democracy. How come those drastic changes come upon on the same state? I really wanted to ask this question.
In the post-World War era, we had Nazi Germany, and now we have a new Germany having all kinds of respects in democracy, human rights, and all peace. And so how could that happen, such a change? Difficult question?
No, it's not a difficult question. It's a very relevant question. It comes back to what, for instance, again, back to the 1994 article, Culture is Destiny. When the Allied troops moved into Germany in 1945, they had a little booklet telling them about Germans. And it was telling them about German culture and to warn them, like, don't fraternize with the enemy, be careful. And then it singled out like what German culture is and what Germans are, and that they're aggressive, authoritarianist, that they only have to be dealt with strength, they only respect force. So these things were not very, if you read them from today, they don't sound very kind. But from the perspective of 1945 and having fought against Germany under the Nazis, they make perfect sense. So how do you transform a culture or a pattern of behaviors? It takes a long time, I think. But in the same way that you can educate people to hate each other, you can also encourage them at least to respect each other. I mentioned France and Germany. In our history textbooks, we always said like, the French invaded us, they did this to us, they did this to us, they did. So when you're as a child and you read about this in your history textbook, you think, oh, these guys are very bad. if you read in the history textbooks, yes, they invaded us, but it was a reaction to an invasion from there. And if you have a more balanced view, maybe you can see that at the end of the day, the soldiers had so much more in common than actually fighting each other. So you can make a conscious effort of changing social norms and changing social values. It is difficult, and to come back also to the argument of Lee Kuan Yew and others, I don't think it's black and white. It's not like you either have this or you have this. There are all these shades in between. But it is possible, but it happens very rarely. And in Germany it could happen because in 1945 we were down and out. We were beaten completely in the war, but in addition to that there was also a moral destruction. When young Germans saw what was happening in the name of German culture, when they were shown the images of the concentration camps, it's shocking. And even then, it took a long, long time. Many Germans closed their eyes. They say, oh, I didn't know, I wasn't involved, I only followed orders. So it took a long time. And even now, today, we have a party in Germany who says, enough, let's not deal with the past, and we stop apologizing anymore. We have to be different now. So it's never, history is never over. The echoes are always there, sometimes stronger, sometimes not so strong. But I think it is possible to change if you really have that. But maybe as a last comment, like if we break down changing a nation, think how difficult it is to change your own behavior. When do people change? Maybe if a doctor tells you, if you don't stop smoking now, you'll be dead within 2 years. That's an existential threat. Then you might change. But how often do we read, oh, we should eat this, we should behave like this, we should do more sports, and look at it, how difficult it is to change ourselves. And then you can imagine how difficult it is for a nation to change. And it takes a long, long time. It takes a long, long time to change.
Thank you, sir. Let me do it this way. I'd like to share with you some great news related to President Kim Dae-jung. And then I will wrap up this session as also the two-day festival itself. Recently, in October this year, the International Political Science Association, which is an umbrella organization of all the political science associations worldwide, has established the Kim Dae-jung Award. We are having a World Congress of International Political Science Association next year in Korea. By using that opportunity, they wanted to celebrate the legacy of President Kim Dae-jung. If you read the announcement of the award, it says, of course, he was the South Korean president from what year to what year, and then recognize him as the Nobel Peace Prize laureate in 2000. And then they provide the reasons why they established the award. A revered democratic philosopher statesman, 철인 정치인, philosopher statesman, as well as the author of 30-volume Kim Dae-jung works, 30권 Kim Dae-jung 전집 저자. He is celebrated for translating his democratic philosophies and ideas into concrete policies that benefited Korea and the world. Isn't it amazing and very impressive? Because it's a large umbrella organization of political scientists. In July next year, we are expecting about 3,000 to 4,000 political scientists around the world coming to Korea, and at that World Congress, they will provide Kim Dae-jung Award. And every 2 years, they are holding they hold World Congress around the world, and so every 2 years, Kim Dae-jung Award is given to the scholars who contribute, most notably in the areas of global peace, democracy, and human rights. It's time to, celebrate by having all of us. I really wanted to share with this great news, and it's time to wrap up and say goodbye. Thank you again to ambassadors, coming to this session, this afternoon sessions out of your busy schedule, and also thank you all of you who have been here. It's always tempted to leave early enough, but you have been kept your seats, for 2 days. From here, I can see all your faces. Thank you so much. And by this, we officially closing the 2-day Peace Festival commemoration of the centennial of the birth of President Kim Dae-jung. Thank you so much.
네, 고맙습니다. 강연을 해주신 게오르그 슈미트 대사님, 그리고 또
Thank
긴
you very
시간
much, Ambassador
좌장으로 이끌어주신
Georg
백학순
Schmidt
원장님께
of
다시 한번
the
뜨거운
German
박수
Embassy here in
보내주시면
Korea and the
감사하겠습니다.
moderator, Dr. Baek-Hak-sun. Thank you very much.
네, 마지막 강연은 김대중 독일인의 시각으로 본 그의 유산이라는 주제로 함께 진행을 했습니다.
So it was a
자, 이틀간
very
김대중 대통령과
insightful
함께 걷는
presentation,
평화
the last
생명의
presentation
길이라는
by
주제로
the
여러
ambassador,
강연과 토론이
which
진행됐습니다.
wraps up our
김대중
2
대통령은
days of
많은 어록을 생전에
festival,
남기기도 했죠.
literally.
인생은
President Kim
생각할수록
Dae-jung left
아름답고
many
역사는 앞으로 발전한다. 아마 많은 분들이
famous
동의하실
quotes.
텐데요. 이틀간 우리가 진행했던
And we've
여러
shared
대화와
several of
논의,
them
토론들이
I
앞으로
hope
밝은
that
미래를
the
만들어 나가는
discussions we've
밑거름이
had for the
되기를
past 2 days
기대하면서
will serve
오늘 행사
as
마무리하도록
rich
하겠습니다.
nutrients for you as
아무쪼록
you
마지막까지 함께해 주신 여러분께 다시
continue
한번
with
감사
your
인사드리고요.
work, your studies,
오늘 저녁
your research.
6시부터는 목포
Just a
문화예술회관
short reminder,
광장에서
from
유명
6
가수들이
o'clock
함께하는
this
평화
evening, we will have
콘서트가
a
열린다고
peace
하니까요.
concert
따뜻하게
to
입으시고
celebrate the
함께
occasion.
자리해 주시면
So
좋을 것 같습니다. 그럼 저는
take out
여기서
your
이만
warm coats and do join
인사드리겠습니다.
us
아나운서
for the evening
연민나였습니다.
program. Thank you
고맙습니다.
very much.